Are we good? Boss says we're good. Okay, I think most of you know who I am, but just in case you don't, I am Diane Rivero. I am Adam Rivero's wife. And this morning we are going to be talking about managing our expectations. Now, for those of you who were here last year, this session we did on how to set up for success. So some of the things that we'll talk about today in this session and in the session later are building on that session from last year. So if you weren't here last year, I do believe we're making the sessions available on ReadyScribe publication. Okay, so if you go there, that session is recorded as a podcast, so you can listen to it. If some of the stuff we're saying today, you're like, what is she talking about? Or if you just simply don't remember, which I wouldn't blame you, you can always watch that as kind of a refresher. One of the things we want to be careful about at FIT is making our sessions applicable to you year after year. So we don't necessarily want to cover the same topic, the same examples every year, because if you've been one year, why would you come again, right? So those are available so that you can kind of catch up on some of the things that we're kind of talking about today as though you already have somewhat of an understanding. That being said, if you have a question, this is not a be quiet and listen to me. I love questions. I'd love to answer them. Even if I don't answer them in this session, I'll make sure we get to it later in the question and answer. Okay, so is having expectations good or bad? What do you think? Is having an expectation good or bad? It's not a trick question, I promise. Good. Anthony says bad. Anyone else think bad? Expectations are bad. Most of you think they're good? Bad?
It can be if you use it to prepare yourself.
Sure. Yep, they can be good or...
Also change when you get into it.
Correct. So this is what I found interesting when I was preparing for this. I found these quotes. Don't lower your expectations to meet your performance. Raise your level of performance to meet your expectations. Expect the best of yourself and then do what is necessary to make it a reality. Okay, so that would mean expectations are a good thing, right? We have a high expectation. We raise our performance to meet that expectation. High achievement always takes place in the framework of high expectation. So you want to reach a high goal, you set a high expectation, you work hard to get there. Then I found if you expect nothing from somebody, you are never disappointed. Okay, so our expectation is bad then. Blessed is he who expects nothing, for he shall never be disappointed. When you have expectations, you are setting yourself up for disappointment. And that was by the world-renowned theologian Ryan Reynolds. Not sure I would take anything he says for anything, but when you have expectations, you are setting yourself up for disappointment. So here's the thing. Can two things be true at the same time if they seem to be opposing each other? And the answer, I don't know how scientific this is, but the answer is yes. Both of these things can be true. Expectations can be good, but expectations can also hurt us and hinder us. So the dictionary, Webster's 1828 dictionary says, expectation is the act of expecting or looking forward to a future event with at least some reason to believe the event will happen. Expectation differs from hope. Hope originates in desire and may exist with little or no ground of belief that the desired event will take place. Expectation is founded on some reasons which render the event probable. Hope is directed to some good. Expectation is directed to good or evil. So that was a large definition, so let's break it down just a little bit. Basically what he's saying is, if we have hope, we hope for good things. Nobody ever hopes for something bad. Well, I would hope you don't hope for something bad to happen to you. If you do, we may need to have a completely different kind of session. Okay, we don't generally hope, oh, I really hope today that I have a flat tire. Okay, I really hope today that I run out of gas. However, if I go into my car and I see that the fuel is low, I might expect that I'm going to run out of gas if I don't fill it. Do you see the difference between hope and expectation? So sometimes as teachers, as children workers, as ministry workers, we can go into our environment with hope. I hope this is a good class. Or I hope the kids understand this principle that I'm trying to teach. Or I hope this behavioral chart that I have worked out for Johnny, I hope it helps him. But hope doesn't really get us anything. Hope is just this fanciful idea that we're just kind of like crossing our fingers that it will work, okay? And I'm not talking about biblical hope that's in something sure. You understand the difference there. But expectation would require that I've put in some work, that I've put in a plan in place, and that I'm implementing that plan. So I've set out my expectations for this session. I have a plan in place. I've worked at it. I've thought about it. I've done things here and there to try and make it valuable. So I expect that something good will come out of this session. The problem is, what if my expectations are not met? What if somebody in the room has a question that I don't know the answer to? Well, then my expectations are let down. And so we have to learn how to manage our expectations for good or for bad. So, number one, we need to manage our expectation as teachers. How many of you in here teach in a junior church, Sunday school, Christian school? Okay, so we've got a lot of teachers in here. So, as teachers, we have a certain level of expectation. I was talking to some of the ladies last night about I'm a music teacher at a Christian school, and it's expected that I do a Christmas program. Well, I can't just hope that those kids are going to get up there and sing a Christmas song. There's going to be certain levels of expectation that come from me as the teacher as to what they're going to do to learn so that we can perform at Christmas time. But here's the thing. Sometimes our expectations can be too high. So letter A is we need to learn when to lower our expectations. There may be a time when we need to actually lower our expectation. The first point there is if a child is having a hard day. If a child is having a hard day. So I could have all the best plans in the world. I'm just going to use AJ as an example because he's my son and I know I can talk about him publicly. So let's just say I don't teach in our junior church class, but let's just say for this example that I do. And I'm teaching in our junior church class, and I know that AJ has issues with transitioning from activity to activity. So I've worked hard and I've come up with a plan on how I'm going to help him in my class to transition from, song time to lesson time, those kind of things. So I can have it all set. I can have my schedule, I can have the props, I can have the fidgets, I can have everything. But he may just be having a really bad day. And none of the things that I have planned to do are going to work that day because he's having a bad day. Like we all have bad days, right? And, maybe you didn't get enough sleep and the coffee that would normally pick you up that day isn't going to pick you up because you're more tired. So you're having a bad day. So it doesn't matter how much I've planned, how much I've worked, how much I'm implementing the plan. He might just be having a bad day. So in that situation, I need to lower my expectations. Instead of expecting that he's going to follow the plan, I maybe just need to have a little bit of grace and understand, okay, today's going to be a little bit extra rough. So maybe he needs to go with his aide and take a break more often than he would. And that was not my expectation, but because he's having a bad day, I'm going to lower my expectation to meet the child where they're at, instead of trying to drag the child up to where I am. Does that make sense? To lower that expectation. So that's kind of one that you would not necessarily know until the child comes into your class, okay? But number two is if a new student or worker comes into your class. If a new student or worker comes into your class. So there's two reasons here why you might need to lower your expectation. Okay, the first one is you might not know the student. Maybe they're coming in, maybe they have special needs. Maybe they don't, but it's a new environment to them. They're not going to know your rules or your procedures. They're not going to know the other kids. And so if I see a new student walk into my classroom for junior church, I'm immediately going to have a lower expectation of what I might achieve that day so that I can meet that child where they're at and so I can make them comfortable, so I can acclimatize them to my class. Sometimes we're so focused on where we want to go that we don't realize we're dragging the kids along with us. And that's for special needs or non-special needs kids. That's just teaching in general. We have to manage these expectations with the kids and bring them with us. So if I have a new student, okay, maybe we're going to spend a little bit more time that day on the rules of the classroom. The problem with that is if you have a special needs child like AJ in your class, he's not going to understand, we've already done the rules today. Why are we doing them again? You know, because that's not what we do. So in my situation with him, I'm going to have to make sure that I'm explaining to him, okay, listen, AJ, we have a new student today. Can you help me teach them the rules? You already know them. You're so good at this. Come help me teach them the rules. So my expectation for how the day is going to go might have to be lower than I would normally have on a Sunday morning. And then if I have a new worker come into my class, obviously, I would hope that if we have a new worker, we would know that ahead of time. They wouldn't just show up on a Sunday morning. But, you know, to try and remember that if you are the lead teacher and you're having workers come in, what may be second nature to you, they have not yet learned. Your job is to teach them. And so having an expectation of that teacher or that worker where it's like, I already told you we don't give Johnny the crayons. Okay, lower your expectation. They're not where you're at yet. Help them to learn and have grace with them as they're learning the routines for your class. Okay, number 3 there, when to lower your expectations, is if the concept you are teaching isn't going over as well as you had hoped. Anybody had that? Yep. I thought this was a really exciting lesson, and the kids are looking at me like, huh? I get that as a music teacher too. Like I'm really excited about quarter notes and they're like, yay, you know, wow, you can clap 4 times. So sometimes we go in and we just know that this concept that I'm teaching, the kids are going to get it. And it's going to be so exciting and the kids don't get it, whether they're special needs or not. Sometimes that's what happens. So in that kind of situation, I may need to lower my expectation of where I thought we were going to end the lesson. And maybe instead of teaching the whole lesson, teach a smaller portion of it that day. You know, especially if you have a special needs kid that's having a bad day, right? So we're lowering our expectation. Is the goal to get through the lesson, or is the goal for the child to learn something about God? The goal is for the child to learn something about God. If you don't get to the whole lesson, it doesn't mean you're a bad teacher. But sometimes we're hard on ourselves and we have this curriculum and it's got 13 weeks and at the end of 13 weeks we get a new one. So we've got to get through 1 week a week, otherwise we're going to be behind. That's maybe an unrealistic expectation. Now, I'm not your pastor or your children's church worker. I don't know what they expect from you. But if there is a situation where you're expected to stay with all the other classes, have a conversation with your leader and say, look, I have this kid in class. He's really struggling to keep up. Is it okay if we get through, 2 things a year instead of 4, right? And that would be lowering my expectation. But it's not a bad thing to lower my expectation. Number 1 under that point is focus on one truth. Focus on one truth. Here's an example of a topic that I might teach. I just remembered, we're done at 10, right? Okay. Here's an example of a topic that I might teach in my Sunday school class, okay? It says, who is God? Whoa, that's a big topic. I think as adults, we don't always fully comprehend this topic, okay? So who is God? I'll explain what these are a little bit later, okay? So who is God? And so I might go through this with my class and explain to them who God is. I'm not going to teach this lesson. I just want to show it to you as an example. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to explain this concept of who God is. And as I go through, I may have a student, like, for example, my son AJ, he's not going to grasp this concept. It's way too abstract for him. So all I want him to take away from this lesson is, I can know and love God. Okay? And that may seem really simplistic if you're teaching 12-year-olds, which is how old he is. But that's all he can manage right now, is I can know and love God. So let me ask you, is it better that he leaves class knowing I can know and love God? Or is it better that he left class not understanding anything at all? Of course, it's better that he understands a little bit. So taking some time to plan your lesson, Look at that lesson, and you know your kids. Decide, is this too hard a concept for AJ to learn? I'm not going to lower the lesson because the other kids need to learn who God is. But how can I take something out of this lesson and make it applicable so that AJ can leave having learned something? Maybe not the same as all the rest of the kids, but something, a building block of what all the other kids are learning about. And so that would be an example of lowering our expectation. Focus on one truth. And remember, number 2, them knowing you and God loves them is the most important truth that they can know. Knowing that you and God love them is the most important truth that they can know. Special needs kids know if you think they're a bother. Special needs kids know if you feel like they're holding back your progress. They pick up on things. There's this false narrative out there that, especially children with autism, that they don't understand emotion and what's going on. And to a point, I understand where people are coming from, but my son knows when I'm upset. And he knows if his behavior is upsetting me. He maybe doesn't understand the reason why, but he can feel my emotion. And so you want your students in your class to leave your class without a doubt knowing Miss Rivero loves me and God loves me. And okay, maybe I had a bad day in her class today. Maybe I left without my green card, which we'll talk about later. But you know what? She still loves me. He still loves me. God still loves me. And, we want that as adults, but sometimes with our special needs kiddos, we need to emphasize that extra. And so we maybe need to lower our expectation for the day so that we don't miss out on the opportunity of teaching the kids that we love them. Okay, letter B, when to raise your expectations. We talked a little bit about this last night, but the first point under there is, if you are viewing class time as daycare. If you are viewing class time as daycare. And I'm not going to go into that too much because my husband did a really good job of covering a lot of that last night in the philosophy of special needs ministry. But the Lord gave us a great commission. And that great commission is to go into all the world, preach the gospel, baptize, and teach them, to disciple them. If we're having a special needs kid come into our class and our only goal is for them to not get hurt, not hurt someone else, and not leave the room, you need to raise your expectation. Your goal should be that they are going to learn something about God. This much is fine, but something. Jesus loves me. Even if they don't fully comprehend what that is, you need to have an expectation that your children are going to learn about God. If you're looking at it as a daycare, you need to raise your expectation. Your students are there to be taught about salvation. Your students are there to be taught about salvation. And we talked about this last night too. Our son is 12. He does not understand the gospel. But I don't know if one day he will. And I'm not going to wait until I realize he understands to start teaching him. We don't do that with our other children, right? We don't wait until a child has reached the age where they will comprehend all there is about salvation for us to start teaching it. We teach it in the nursery. Jesus loves me, this I know. Jesus died for all the children of the world. We teach them that when they're 1 year old because we want the Spirit to start working on them from the minute they're born. We want to be working towards their salvation. That is no different with a special needs child because you don't know. You don't know if they will ever reach a point where they understand the gospel. And so it is our responsibility to teach them about salvation. Number 2, your saved students are there to be taught how to be disciples. Your saved students are there to be taught how to be disciples. Well, I think we get into this a little bit later. It's not our job necessarily as church workers to teach children how to behave. That's really a parent's job, right? But it is our job to teach them what God says about behavior. So it is our job to teach them lying is a sin. The Bible says to be kind. We're in our Patch Club, we're going through the fruits of the Spirit. AJ doesn't understand all of those concepts, but he can tell you what it means to be kind or unkind. He can tell you what it means to be patient or not patient. And so he's not saved yet, but we're still teaching him these biblical principles, and that's why they're there. All right, a second reason why you should raise your expectations is if you are letting behaviors slide. If you are letting behaviors slide. There are philosophies out there that would teach you as workers, teach us as parents, that your special needs child cannot learn to be obedient or cannot learn to be polite. Pastor Dunbar said good morning to my son this morning, and he just straight past him, didn't acknowledge him. He wasn't doing that on purpose, right? He wasn't trying to be rude. But it's my job as his parent to teach him, you need to be aware of the people that are around you. And it's polite when someone says good morning to say good morning back. So we had him come back in and we had him say good morning. I didn't discipline him for it. He wasn't being naughty. He just needs to still learn. And so let's say in your class you're learning about being a good friend, okay? You can teach your special needs kids what it means to be a good friend. Even if they're not understanding the whole concept like the rest of your students are, you can still teach it to them. What does it mean to be a good friend? Oh, you have a block. Well, Johnny wants a block. Can we share with him? Can we build together? Can we whatever? You can fill in the gaps there with your kids. What we have to be careful of is that we're not just saying, well, you know, AJ doesn't understand to say hi to Pastor Dunbar, so it's not a big deal. No, it is a big deal. He needs to learn to be polite. And we can handle it in a way that's graceful. Like I said, I didn't give him into trouble for it. I just reminded him, hey, when someone says good morning, you say good morning back. And we have to be real careful in our churches when we're working with special needs kids and as parents of special needs kids that we don't make excuses for our kids' behaviors just because they have a special need. On the flip side of that coin, we have to be careful that we don't ask a child to stop a behavior simply because it makes us uncomfortable. So what I mean by that, AJ will vocally stim. So he'll make noises, or he might spin around the room, or he might flap his hands and arms, okay? That's not really a bad behavior, okay? I can teach the other kids in my class, AJ needs to do this. It's something that helps him to be able to concentrate. So when he's doing that, we're going to move him to the corner, the back of the room, so he can do that. Y'all need to learn to just look at Mr. Rivero. You don't need to worry about him. Train your other students. This is normal, and you just give me your attention. If I stop that behavior simply because it's making me uncomfortable, that's not having grace. Now, if a child is hitting, no, that's no, okay? You see the difference here? So you have to ask yourself, is this really a bad behavior, or is this just something that's making it difficult for me to teach in class? And if it is, well, maybe we need to do some workarounds there so that the child can do what they need to do. AJ chews on a fidget almost all the time. If he doesn't, he'll chew on his clothes. Okay, well, before I had AJ, I might have thought that was gross. And I would have been like, no, take that out of your mouth. That's yuck. Don't do that, you know. He needs to do that. And so that's my preference. And so we have to be careful that we're not stopping behaviors simply because of a preference of ours. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions about that? We'll get into that a little bit more later too. Okay, number 2, as students, we need to manage our students' expectations. Make sure they know what to expect in class. Make sure they know what to expect in class. What does this look like? And we're really going to get into this in the Calming the Chaos. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. Number 1, consistent schedules. Number 2, consistent rules. Number 3, consistent consequences. Number 4, consistent procedures. And number 5, consistent policies. And I will get into a little bit more of that in the sessions later on. But what this would look like is when you have a special needs child coming into your class, they should know what's going to happen from the moment they step in the room to the moment they leave the room. Now, again, like I said earlier, sometimes we have to lower our expectations, and special needs children have to learn how to manage their expectations too. Okay? There are times when our son will go out to a restaurant and he'll expect that when we get there, he's getting mac and cheese and he's getting orange soda. And that's just what's happening. And then we get there and the orange soda is out. Oh my goodness, it's the end of the world. There's no orange soda. Okay, so we have to teach him to manage his own expectations, right? And so we'll say to him, okay, we're going out to eat. What are we going to do if there's no orange soda? Oh, we can make a different choice. Right. What can your different choice be? Oh, well, I'll have Sprite. Perfect. Okay, we're managing his expectations before the problem arises. So if you know you're going to have a missionary come into your class in 2 weeks or 4 weeks, a month from now, however soon you know it's coming, you start talking about it. Hey, in a month, maybe even have a countdown on your board. Hey, look, in 4 weeks, Pastor Rivero is coming to speak at our church, and he's going to come into our Sunday school class. What are you doing? You're managing their expectation. Instead of them just arriving at your class, and there's a strange guy there. Like, what? You're not supposed to be here, And so having something to help manage their expectation is very helpful. Letter B there is make sure you are not asking more of them than they can give. Make sure you're not asking more of them than they can give. My son cannot sit still. Well, he can do much more now. But let's go back like 3 years ago. He would not have been able to sit still for a church service. It was cruel to ask him to. He hadn't learned that ability yet. Just like it's not fair to ask an infant not to cry when they're hungry, right? That's how they communicate. They're hungry, they cry. With my son, when he was, 9, 10, it was cruel of me to ask him to sit still in church for 40 minutes. He couldn't do it. And so if I'm asking him to do it, then I'm expecting too much of him. And I have to help lower my expectations so that I'm requiring from him what he can give me. Now, we worked on it and worked on it and worked on it. And now he can sit through an entire church service. He sits in the church with us on Sunday nights. And for the most part, he doesn't really make noise, doesn't get up, he's learned. But it took a long time. So make sure you're not asking them to do something they're not capable of. Here's some ways we can do this. Number 1, we can provide sensory breaks, or we can provide breaks or sensory items. We can provide breaks or sensory items. Our junior church has experienced a booming of growth lately, which is a blessing. But for AJ, it's a lot. It's a crowded room. It's loud. And so to help him cope with that, he brings headphones to church. And he wears them in the classroom. He's not listening to anything because we want him to pay attention to his teacher. But it just helps dampen some of the sound, especially when they're singing. We also, in our building, our kids stay in the same room for Sunday school and junior church. We don't have, there's not really anywhere for them to go. We don't have a basement where they can go run off some energy. Our building here is pretty packed for the morning service. That's a lot for AJ to handle, to stay in that room. So we have a plan in place where his, whoever is his aide, goes and picks him up from Miss Ruth's Sunday school class and takes him to his dad's office where he has a preferred activity, which means something that is highly valuable to him. It's usually an alphabet puzzle and snacks. It's not complicated, kid. He's pretty easy to please. But he knows as soon as Sunday school is done, he gets to go to Daddy's office and he gets a break. And he gets to have his alphabet puzzle and he gets to have a snack. And then he comes into junior church and he's calm and he's ready for the day. So allowing your kids to have that break, however it looks like in your church. You don't have to do what we do. Find what works in your church's situation, But if they need that break, and by break, I don't just mean free time where there's not structure. I mean, they may need to be removed from the other kids to have a minute to like calm down, right? I need that as a teacher. Like, oh. So allow them to have that break. And then number 2 there, include them in a way that makes sense with their situation. And we will talk a lot more about that in the next session that I do. Include them in a way that makes sense with their situation. The story that always comes to my mind about this point is I had a pastor's wife ask me once. They had a little girl in their church, who had Down syndrome. And she was nonverbal. And the parents are so sweet. And they very much wanted their daughter to learn about Jesus and to be a part of the class and not to be just left on the sidelines. And the teacher wanted that too. And the pastor's wife, they all were trying to work together. So the mom said to the teacher, no, just make her do what all the other kids do. And the teacher thought, okay, well, I've got to make her do what all the other kids do, which is not quite how the mom meant it. There was a slight miscommunication. So the child is nonverbal. The kids have to say a memory verse in order to get a sticker on their chart. Do you see where this is going? Teacher says to a child, you have to come up, and your mommy wants you to do everything that the other kids are doing. You've got to come up and say the memory verse. The child can't talk. There's no way the child's going to say the memory verse. And so then, well, I'm sorry, you can't have a sticker. Heartbroken little girl goes home crying to mom and dad because I didn't get a sticker. Teacher did not do anything wrong. I know all the people involved in this scenario. She just didn't know what to do, right? And so the pastor's wife was like, help me, what do we do? And I was like, okay, well, how about if you make, and you don't have to be fancy with this stuff, okay? Cardboard, cardstock, markers. Have the Bible verse, or we'll talk about this later, or a modified form of a Bible verse on cardstock, and little child comes up, puts the verse in order, because she's smart. She just couldn't talk, right? Just because you can't talk doesn't mean you're not intelligent. And so little girl would come up, put the memory verse in order. She said her memory verse. She got her sticker. Okay? So look for ways that you can include your children. It could even be at my son's school, there are some children that are extremely disabled, and they have, I'll show you this later too, they have little speech bubbles. It could just be mom and dad recorded the Bible verse on the speech bubble. Little Johnny hits the speech bubble. He said his memory verse. He gets a sticker. Do you see what I'm saying? How you might need to lower your expectation to help them be able to participate. And number 3 there is show lots of grace. Lots of grace. Okay, number 3, as parents. As parents. So this next section is, letter A, is for the parent. So I'm not necessarily speaking to the teachers in the room or online. I'm speaking to parents that are watching that have special needs kids. Have grace with your child's teacher. Have grace with your child's teacher. They're more than likely doing the very best that they know how. When we were handed our son's diagnosis, we didn't know what to do. We had no clue. I had known a couple of children with nonverbal autism before, but I was like 14, I wasn't really paying attention. I loved them. They would come to my house, I would babysit them, but I wasn't like watching how to teach them or what to do. So if we as parents struggle with how to help our own children, we should not expect more of the teachers that see our kid once a week for an hour a week, okay? We need to have grace with our children's teachers. Number 2, handle conflicts with kindness. And this does go for the teacher also. Handle conflicts with kindness. There's going to be times where you have a disagreement. You know, we're humans. We're not always going to see eye to eye. We're not always going to agree. As a teacher, you may be very firm on something in your classroom, and the parent may be very firm that their child cannot do it. Okay, that's a conflict. Doesn't necessarily mean you're yelling at each other. You just have a difference of opinion. So handle those situations with kindness. one thing that we have really worked on in our home as a family is the last year really is not ascribing motive to people. Okay, if you don't know someone's motive, don't give it a motive. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Let's say, for example, my husband is on his phone right now. He's not, because it's recording me. But let's just say, for example, he's on his phone while I'm giving, my lesson. I could look at him and be like, oh, he doesn't even care. Like, he's not even paying attention. Oh my goodness, how rude. I can't believe. Maybe it's a church member texting saying, my mom's in the hospital. She's, very sick. Can you know what I mean? Like, I can't give a motive to something he's doing without knowing all of the situation. So when you're dealing with, whether it's parents dealing with a teacher, whether it's teachers dealing with a parent, don't assign motive to what the other one is doing. Don't assume you know what they're thinking or why they're doing what they're doing. Have a conversation. Parents, that means don't be like, well, Mrs. Rivero just doesn't care about my kid, and that's why she didn't give him a sticker. Okay? That's assuming a motive. Talk to the teacher, talk to the parents, and come to a resolution. All right, letter B is with the parent. So teacher and parent together, with the parent. Make sure to explain all your procedures and policies. Did you miss one? Oh, thank you. Remember that your child is not perfect. Sorry, thank you. So again, for parents, if Miss Emily was working in my church and she came to me and said, well, AJ did such and such, first of all, I'd probably be like, yeah, that makes sense, but what I can't do is like, oh no, not my AJ. There's no way my AJ did that. And so, your child is not perfect. Just because the teacher is talking to you as a parent about something that went on in class does not mean they hate your child. Remember that we're all sinners and our goal is the same, right? All of our goals as parents, as workers, as pastors, our goal is to bring that child to Jesus Christ. So keep the main thing the main thing. All right, with the parent. Make sure to explain all your procedures and policies to your parents, okay? So that may mean you need to make a home visit and go and sit down with Mr. Rivero and explain to him, this is what we do in class. This is our visual schedule. This is the lessons we're covering. This is the things I would like to do with AJ to help him understand the lessons. These are our policies, okay? And I think we're going to get into policies a little bit more and frequently asked questions, so we'll come back to that. But you need to have a policy I think most of our churches probably have a handbook for workers, right? If you're a junior church worker or a Sunday school worker, there's expectations that your pastor has laid out for you, but you also should have a policy for the students. Here's an example. In the nursery, do y'all have a policy that if the child has a fever, they can't come in, okay? That's a policy, and it's like written in stone. There's a fever, the child cannot come in. And so in your special needs, if you have a class with a special needs child in it, you need to have a firm policy on what you would do. What are you going to do if a child elopes? What are you going to do if a child's behavior becomes violent? What are you going to do X, Y, Z? And we'll get into that. And the reason why policies are important is because it protects you as the teacher. And it really does help your pastor too, because it's like, look, we already talked about this. Some churches have the parents sign it, so it's like, we talked about this, Johnny's coming in every week and he's throwing rocks at the teacher every single week. Until he has learned to control this behavior, then, whatever your policy is, we're going to enforce it. Number 2, listen to their concerns. So teachers listen to the parents' concerns with an open mind and heart. Those of us who are educators, who have worked in a school, work in a school, have higher education on how to be an educator, we can be some of the worst about, well, this is the way we do it. And I can't, I've taught this class for this many years and I've never had a problem and we've always done it this way. And okay, but if a parent is coming to you who knows the child so much better than you do, and they're saying, my child cannot, or this is difficult, or how can we make this work? Have an open mind and heart. Don't just assume because it's never been done before that you can't do it now. So have an open mind and an open heart. Number 3, make sure you're giving positives along with any negatives you might have to pass along. Our old principal, Brother Charles Shaw, he used to always teach us teachers at the beginning of the year to make a compliment sandwich. And he would say, if you're sitting down with a parent and you need to address a tricky behavior, compliment the child or the parent or whatever, tell them what needs to be worked on, compliment the child again. Because I know as a parent, if someone tells me 2 great things about my kid, you're already, I'm soft. Like you can tell me, what. Now you'll have some parents that it won't matter what you do. They're just not going to like that you saying something bad about their kid. In that situation, you just have to pray for them. But if you go into something knowing, okay, and on the flip side, don't only talk to the parent when you have something bad to say. So-and-so had a great week this week. Oh my goodness, he answered questions, or, he sat in his chair for 5 minutes, Have something positive to say when there wasn't anything bad happening too. And then number 4 there is pray with your parents for their little one. So not just pray for the little one, pray with the parents. Pray with them. How can I pray for you as AJ's parents? What's something that you're really burdened about with AJ right now? How can I pray for you? Let's pray right now. Let's pray and ask Jesus to help you with this medical decision that you have to make. And the reason why that's important is because we're commanded to. Okay, the Bible says that we are to pray for one another. Number 2, a parent knowing that you care, and it's a way that you can connect. Sometimes with special needs kids, it's hard to connect with them, right? Because they're not forthcoming. My son loves his Sunday school teacher, Miss Ruth. He loves her. And she brings him gummy bears. And he calls her Gummy Bear. He doesn't call her Miss Ruth. He sees her and he goes, it's Gummy Bear, But, she's taken a little bit of time just to show him that she loves him and has made that connection with him. So do that with the parents too, and make that connection with the parents. Sometimes being a special needs parent is really, really lonely. And we can put on brave faces, and we don't want to come into church all the time and talk about how bad our week was or how hard it was, or the fact that we had to drive an hour to go see a doctor to talk about our kids' poop. Being honest, that's what we had to do this week. We had to drive an hour to see a doctor, to talk to a doctor about our child's poop. Okay? Those are not fun. That's not fun parenting. And special needs parents are not the only ones that go through things like that. I'm not saying that. But in our case, it's more often than it's not. And it's constant. And it's not going to go away. And so it can be lonely. It can be challenging. It can be discouraging. And so don't just love on that little one. Love on their parents. Get to know them. Get to know what their burdens are and help them. And if they're not saved, that's one of the best ways to lead them to Jesus, is by showing them how much you love their kid. Psalm 62 verse 5 says, "My soul, wait thou only upon God, for my expectation is from him." When we find ourselves getting frustrated, offended, or wanting to give up, we need to stop and ask ourselves if our expectation is in the right place. Instead of our expectations being placed in people, talents, or even the tools at our disposal, our expectation needs to be placed in the knowledge that God is with us and will help us with the difficulties we are facing. Crying out to him will help us to get our expectations back under control and provide us the strength to keep going, even in the most difficult of situations.